So that would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christy, that would be different than staff's recommendation to watch.
Right. The staff had recommended not taking a formal position until they could work with the author further and then bring this item back to you as the chair if they were not able to work with the author and address the concerns that we've discussed at this meeting.
Christy, thank you. I support that, what she just stated.
This is Johnny. I support that as well.
So Christy, would it be appropriate for you to restate what we are potentially going to take a motion on?
So, I mean, it's up to the board always in every case whether they feel they need to make a motion. The staff don't think they need it. They think they understand what your intention is. But the idea would be to watch this bill and work with the author to address the liability concerns and other concerns raised by the members at this meeting. And if they are unable to address those concerns through these informal discussions, then to delegate to the chair the authority to change the position on this bill to an oppose.
So as stated, there is no motion to be made. And and if we're concurrent, then we would move on to our next item.
Got a hand raised by Rodney.
Rodney, please.
Just for clarification, so that means that it will not come before the board at our next meeting. If staff cannot work out anything with the authors, that they will take a position as to oppose it, and then it comes before the board. I just need clarification on it.
I'd like to clarify. Yes, if we can't work it out where the board does not have liability and where the fiscal is drastically reduced or eliminated, then it would come back before you. This is in a bill that has been introduced, so it's moving through the legislative process. So it will be on the board's agenda at the next meeting, whether it's been amended or not. Just if it hasn't been amended to ensure our limited liability, to limit our liability and to reduce the fiscal, then I would recommend an oppose at that time. I am just asking for extra time to work with the sponsors of this bill because they were willing to work with us last year.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Any additional comments from board members?
Michael Mark has hand raised.
Please, Mr. Mark.
So our next board meeting isn't until June, correct? And this is going to go through committee meetings between now and then. It sounds like there's enough board members who are contemplating trying to make sure everything gets worked out. Is it better to support with the clarification that there's no fiscal impact to CSLB? Would that be a proper motion? So again, what I'm saying is, there's time between now and the next board meeting. It has to go through a committee chairs. A lot of times they want to know what's CSLB's position on this. So what I'm asking, is it better to make a motion to say, let's support this bill as long as it has these amendments that meet CSLB's items? Does that make sense? Instead of a oppose, unless that way it's support with the caveat of these items that staff needs clarification on.
Christy,
Hi. Normally, if we take a support if amended or oppose unless amended, we would propose amendments at the same time. But I'm wondering from legal if there's a way that we can craft a motion to accomplish what board member Mark is asking.
So you could craft a motion that states that you direct staff to work with the author's office to address the issues raised at this meeting if the staff are unable to address with the author those concerns, you delegate to the chair of the legislative committee the authority to help draft amendments that address the concerns. And if those amendments are not accepted, that, Fauna, do you want them to take a position at that point? If they are addressed, then I guess it would be support.
Right.
I mean, you can say it that way. So you could say it in the positive. Do you see what I'm saying? So direct staff, sorry. Okay, let me start over. So the motion would be to direct staff to work with the author's office to address the concerns raised at this meeting, to work with the legislative chair and keep him apprised of the issues and its progression. If the issues are addressed, then authorize the legislative chair to take a support, if amended, position.
Michael Mark will make that motion.
Cobus will second it.
Okay. With that, can we have a vote, Mariah?
Do we need public comment?
Do we need public comment? We probably do.
Yes.
My apologies.
Thanks.
Rico, are there those in the public that would like to comment on this item?
No public comment.
Thank you, Lee. All right, with that, Mariah, would you please call roll?
Mary Tykert, approved absence. Rodney Cobos.
Aye.
David De La Torre.
Aye.
Miguel Galarza.
Aye.
Susan Granzella.
Aye.
Alan Guy.
Aye.
Jacob Lopez, approved absence. Diana Love.
Aye.
Michael Mark.
Aye.
Stephen Pinelli, approved absence. James Ruane.
Aye.
Johnny Simpson.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. The next bill that we're here to review is AB 1204 by Assemblyman Holden, which starts on page 162 of your packet. This bill would prohibit contractors from under specific circumstances from subcontracting with two or more contractors in the same classification on the same job site. This bill would make violation of this section cause for disciplinary action. According to the author's fact sheet, this bill is intended to prevent contractors from misclassifying employees as subcontractors to avoid compliance with workmen's compensation requirements. Fauna, would you please present a review of this bill?
Thank you. Assembly Bill 1204 is sponsored by the State Building Trades Council of California. This bill, according to the author's office, is intended to prevent contractors from subcontracting with multiple contractors rather than hiring employees. According to the author and sponsor, contractors do this to avoid complying with workers' compensation insurance and employee tax requirements. We did not identify a fiscal for this bill by the published deadline. However, staff will be looking into enforcement impacts this bill may create. Regardless, effective January 1, 2023, Senate Bill 216 requires all C8, C20, C22, and D49 contractors to carry workers' compensation insurance, regardless of whether the contractor has employees. Further, on January 1st, 2026, all other classifications will also be required to have workers' compensation insurance on file with the board. Therefore, the requirements of SB 216 make this bill, AB 1204, duplicative of existing law while imposing potentially unnecessary restrictions on contracting businesses. This bill would especially impact small businesses who would be excluded from large jobs because they do not have enough employees to complete the job. Staff recommended a watch because it's so early in the legislative process, but I would also recommend considering an oppose. Just because of the impact to business. And I know Committee Chair Galarza has some input he wants to give on this. So this bill is scheduled to be heard by the Assembly Committee on Business and Professions on April 11th, 2023. And I turn it back to the board to discuss.
Thank you, Fiona. Before sharing my comments, are there members of the board that would like to speak on this item? Hearing and seeing none, I'll go ahead and make my comments on this item. To the point earlier, I think number one, obviously, as specified, January 1st, 2026, all contractors, irrespective of their employees, will have to have workman's comp as part of the law. But secondly, and more importantly, this would significantly impact contractors who are in relationships with large and small subcontractors, creating a space for small contractors on large projects. Oftentimes there's a mentor-protege agreement or role or subcontracting goals in which a large general contractor may select multiple subcontractors to perform similar scopes of work or similarly licensed work. For instance, there may be a large, take for instance the Salesforce building for an example, very large building, very large drywall firm would need to handle the horsepower. However, there's probably subcontracting goals on that job, which would create a space for a small business to grow their business under the guidance and directions of the large drywall contractor in some type of mentoring role. That would be precluded, and the prime contractor would not be able to fulfill his small business requirements if he could not list small contractors to do this work. Let's take, for instance, painting. There are exterior painters, there are interior painters, there are painters that specialize in steel structures. There's a lot of different painting going on certain projects, and you would prohibit a prime contractor from utilizing specialty painters. It does not break down what type of painting they're doing. They're saying, if you have a C39 license, you can only list one to do all that scope. And so that would be problematic for the prime contractor. So I think there needs to be more thought put into it, the potential impacts for contractors, small and large, to be able to do their business in the state of California in a cost-effective manner, and yet provide small business opportunities for smaller contractors to grow their business as well. So those are my comments. Anyone from the public would like to comment on this item?
No public comment, but Michael Mark has hand raised.
Mr. Mark, board member Mark, please.
Thank you. Maybe this is a question for staff. So is this bill supposed to help target 1099 issues or like misclassification? Is that what this bill's for? Or am I hearing it that one licensee holder can't have multiple subcrafts, unless they have their own license? Maybe that I need some clarification there.
The author's office said that this is to address 1099 issues. So they claim that there is a practice of 1099ing an employee and then issuing a subcontract rather than hiring them as an employee. So they're avoiding workers' compensation and employee taxes.
So is it for this bill then? It's that particular employee not having a license, and that's why it's they're getting 1099 as a without having their improper subcontractor. Is that what I'm hearing? Or because you can't be a subcontractor and be a 1099 without having a license, right?
Right. So instead of they're subcontracting with multiple subcontractors in the same classification rather than hiring those people as employees. So those subcontractors do have to have a license. We're not sure of the source of information or stats, or even any anecdotal information on that point. That's just what's in the author's fact sheet about this bill.
I guess I'm just a little confused how if the employee, if a subcontractor is subbing out to someone else that doesn't have a license, maybe this is a question for the registrar, then at that point, that 1099 person needs to have a valid contractor's license, correct?
Yeah,
Yes, they do in order to sub. Oh, sorry.
I could just weigh in on this for a sec. Dave, it's interesting. If you look at the flooring industry, there's a limitation where a C15 can, sub out to a C15, but then they can't do additional subs. I mean, there's some limitations there. I think what they're trying to get at is where you have a specialty contractor, and I'll say such as a flooring contractor, that hires numerous subcontractors instead of having employees. So they're looking at a way to circumvent workers' comp laws because there's no workers' comp requirement currently for many trades if you don't have workers. Now that'll all change in 2026, so this will be taken care of. My concern with the bill, though, and I've not been able to get an answer to, is how would this restrict a general building contractor or somebody with a prime contract with the homeowner from subbing out to multiple specialty contractors? And I haven't received that answer. And that's why this is very troubling, because what we don't want to do is in any way inhibit remodeling, residential remodeling, or residential home construction. And so that's where I really have a concern. But I think what they're trying to get at is a sham situation, which I have seen, where a subcontractor would hire numerous other subcontractors to circumvent having to get workers' compensation insurance for their employees.
Thank you, Dave. And just for my clarification, if one of these subcontractors down the tier, if their work is over $500 or, the job's over $500, they all have to have a valid contractor state license, right?
Yeah, there's a labor code section, it's 2750, that says that it's a presumption that if you hire somebody in construction, they're either got to be a bona fide employee or a licensed subcontractor. So you as a licensed contractor are currently required to use licensed contractors as subs, or you have to have workers' comp and withholding for your employees.
So if I might add, Board Member Mark and the full board, I think what I believe is happening, and what I've seen happen myself personally, is a general contractor will hire 3 independent and solely owned painting contractors, right? And those 3, to circumvent a lot of employment laws, will hire those 3 as subcontractors, and they're all working the same scope of work, and they're all working as a crew, as they would be as employees. However, since they do have licenses, they are exempt from workman's comp and EDD and a whole lot of other taxation issues, as they are contractors that are independent. And so I understand the premise of what they're trying to do. The problem is, to register folks' point, for instance, your industry, C4 license, boilers and chillers and that type of work. But oftentimes they don't do the pneumatic controls or the DDC controls. And those would be the same classification. And so now you're saying that your boiler guy has to do the controls, which he may not want to do and doesn't want to do. Now he can't hire a separate control guy with the boiler guy. And that's where it gets really dicey as a general contractor. How are you going to address these multiple trades within the same classification. I think that's the problematic problem that I have with it. Any other thoughts from board members? Yeah. Again, any comments from the public?
No public comment.
No public
I had a
comment?
comment real quick to register our voice, but I think once in 2026, when everyone's required to have workers' comp, a lot of this bill would be, kind of goes away.
Yeah, that would be my take on it, because that's really the issue is contractors trying to avoid obtaining workers' compensation by hiring other licensees that are, quite frankly, sometimes they are employees.
And it just
So that
muddies
would
the
be
water.
taken care of.
It just makes it confusing with no more than 2 subcontractors, because I mean, on some of these, giant work sites, there's more than 2 people doing the same thing.
Absolutely, and it's common in public works, as many of you know, to get joint venture licenses, and what's the impact on all that? So when I read the bill, and I've talked to a lobbyist about it, and I just wasn't able to be clear as to how this would work. What would be the restriction, and is that a restriction that's workable in the industry?
I mean, I can go on and on. Rebar is C33, so structural steel. And a structural steel guy is not doing rebar, and a rebar guy is not doing structural steel. So they have the same classifications, but totally different scopes of work. You have somebody who has a C8 license who's doing structural concrete, doing the actual building, and then you have a guy who's doing the sidewalk work, the site concrete work. The same scope, the same C8 license to do both. However, totally different skill sets to do both types of tradesmanship. So I can go on in every single classification where I can see an issue of pushing this without further review of what actually is trying to be accomplished by this bill. So with that, right now, this is, again, very similar to our last bill, and that was that staff had recommended to take a watch on this item for this bill. So if there is no opposing or alternate motion, then I believe there is no further board action to take. So with that, I would open up to board members whether we proceed with the position of watch, and or is there a motion from the board to take a different position? So hearing and seeing no opposition to the watch position of staff, then I will close this item and move on to the next one, which is AB 1383 by Assemblymember Ortega, which is on page 164 of your pamphlet. This bill would require CSLB to withhold license, insurance, or renewal if a qualifying individual, responsible managing officer, or responsible managing employee is not in compliance with a child support order or judgment. This bill would require licensees to notify the register in writing if they are subject to a child support order. Failure to do so would be cause for license suspension. This bill would also require CSLB to adopt regulations to provide procedures to take actions upon notification by any party having knowledge of child support order and unpaid child support. Finally, this bill would require CSLB to adopt regulations to implement this bill by January 1st of 2025. Mona, would you be so kind as to further this bill?
Thank you. AB 1383 by Assemblymember Ortega is also sponsored by the State Building Trades Council of California. This bill would replace an existing process that is carried out automatically and without cost with a costly manual work-intensive process. Currently, when a parent subject to a child support order is 1 month late, the Department of Child Support Services sends a file to the Department of Consumer Affairs. The department's Office of Information Services has a family support unit who then carries out the suspension. The board does not have discretion in these cases. So literally what we do to carry this out is we send the letters that are generated by the system. This bill would replace that automatic process and require CSLB to adopt regulations to withhold a license issuance or renewal if the qualifier is not in compliance. It would require the regulations to also suspend a license when a qualifier is found to not be in compliance. It would require qualifiers to notify CSLB in writing of when they are subject to a child support order. It would require CSLB to take and investigate complaints from anybody with knowledge of a child support order. And it would require CSLB to file an accusation to suspend a license for failure to comply with a child support order, a process that is automatic right now. Because of the automatic processes, this bill would replace. This bill carries a very large fiscal. Staff have estimated a fiscal impact of $1.42 million for the first year and $1.1 million ongoing. This fiscal includes licensing staff to take inquiries into non-compliant child support orders and to process submitted child support orders from licensees. It would require call center staff to take the complaints that come in. It would require enforcement staff to handle investigations of new complaints that would be received, which normally would go through the automatic process. They would also write the investigative reports that would then go to the Attorney General's office for accusation. Because it would have to go to the Attorney General, this would increase our Attorney General costs. This bill would have an IT impact because it would require custom programming to make changes to our licensing systems to be able to handle the manual suspension of a license. Finally, because we have a full regulatory schedule for the next few years, we would not be able to handle writing or adopting the regulations with existing staff. So we would require a regulatory specialist to implement this bill. I came prepared to recommend and oppose, a strong oppose to this bill because of the fiscal impact and because there's already a process in place. However, I confirmed with the author's office yesterday that this bill will be amended prior to its hearing. The caveat there is that the amendments were not available and they could not give me information about what those amendments would entail in concept. So this bill is scheduled to be heard by the Assembly Committee on Business and Professions on April 11th. So I turn this discussion back over to Miguel. Thank you.
So, Fona, for clarification for the board, staff's recommendation right now at this time is it a watch or no vote?
Well, this changed late last night. I was going to recommend and oppose, but the information I received from the author's office that amendments are coming gives me pause. So I want to, see what the board thinks about either watching it or taking an opposed position now. If we take a position now of oppose and the bill is amended to eliminate all the issues that I just mentioned, then we would have an oppose letter on a bill that does not exist. However, if they don't amend it sufficiently, then we would have lost the opportunity to voice that opposition in policy committee.
Thank you, Fauna.
So, yeah, without seeing language, I would recommend and oppose, but watch is also something that we can work with.
So with those, with that clarifications and comments, I open it up to board members for comments and questions.
We have a hand raised by Christy in DCA Legal.
Feel free, Christy.
Fauna, I just want to ask you, is there an option to take a position but delegate to the legislative chair the authority to change the position if your issues are addressed? Is that a possibility?
Yes. If you could help with that motion, that'd be great.
So before that recommendation for a motion is made by Christy, would it be appropriate to listen to our board members to see if they have any comments or questions? And then digress back?
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there for board member discussion and consideration prior to any discussion. Thank you.
So board members?
David De La Torre, hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. This legislation, I understand the necessity for legislation like this. You know, there's a lot of deadbeats out there. But what about those that are trying to do the right thing? You know, what I heard was if they're in 1 month in arrears, then their license would be suspended. Is that correct?
The Department of Child Support Services said that is what triggers their action. So then they begin their process to communicate with DCA. Now, whether a license is suspended after missing one payment, I am not sure, but they said that's when their process starts, and it's automatically triggered by a missed payment.
Producer Folk?
Yeah, just, I guess, I'm off base on this, but what the staff concern is we would not want to be in a situation where we have to put together some type of an appeal process or have hearings on these type of cases. Right now, we don't, and that if you allegedly owe child support, you have to go to another agency to address that, try to get a continuance. We just rely on what they tell us and we suspend the license. Because if you can envision this, we have limited resources here. We're not set up to be an appeal for child support. It would be a really difficult thing, I think, for us to do. And we do have, I guess the appeal, which does happen is, well, you'll have a licensee that files in Superior Court, like a writ of mandate to try to argue that we shouldn't have suspended the license. We have to defend those. But it's just we're doing this by operation of law. I think we have to be very careful with this because right now we're pretty much, we're not involved in it. If we were actually involved in it, you can imagine you'd have one parent arguing they didn't get child support, the other one arguing they shouldn't pay it. That's not our role here. You know, we have limited resources, and I think you heard earlier, we have like approaching 6,000 consumer complaints we have to focus on. This is an area that is best left to others, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and I support to watch this legislation. I just wanted to make one simple comment is, and the reason I bring up this 1 month, before they take action is, I know there's some awarding bodies that take it forever to pay out on some of these contracts. So it could, like I said, it could, harm some of the good actors that are just trying to do the right thing and then trying to earn a living. So that was it. Just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I think the issue here is that the Contractor State License Board does not have jurisdiction when it comes to the family code. This bill would place that jurisdiction with us. The current process is automatic and we do not have discretion. So the decisions of the courts and the Department of Child Support Services is what drives what happens. We would, prefer to not be the enforcement authority over family law.
Thank you, Fona. Any other comments from board members?
Rodney Cobos has hand raised.
Please, Rodney.
Oh, thank you. So I'm just with the RMO. So there's one deadbeat, and we have this. We have big contractors that have this one individual that's a deadbeat, and we're going to have to shut down their whole contracting business because of this one individual. I don't know if there's any consideration as far as a time frame to where the contractor could find a replacement, because you go in, you're going to hold the license for this one individual. I was just wondering if there's any consideration from the authors on it.
No, as of last night, they said they didn't have any information for me about the amendments that they would be proposing during the policy committee meeting on April 11th. I assume once they develop that, they will be in contact, but as of last night, that it was not available.
This is Dave.
Text.
I don't know, Fod, if you could weigh in on this. Don't we provide at least 30 days before suspending the license like we do for every other suspension? So I'm that would be my thought, so that they could replace the qualifiers, as was mentioned. If it's the qualifier has outstanding child support, well, then you could find somebody else to get a qualifier. And when that qualifier disassociates, they're giving a 90-day grace period. But Fod, could you comment on that if you're with us? Or maybe not, but we could report back to make sure that's the case.
Yes, all those actually controlled by DCA right now. So, but there is a 90 days requirement there.
There's a window for them to replace the qualifier, so that licensed entity would not be put into a suspension right away. So we're not going to put any licensees into what we call 7031 vulnerability, where they may not be able to get paid on their jobs. They just have to clear up the child support, or they're going to have to find a replacement qualifier, and we give 90 days to do that.
Correct.
Got it. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Actually, this is Susan Ranzella. I have a comment in listening to this. The reasons and concerns that Yafana mentioned were almost too numerous to remember. I mean, there are so many concerns. This is a very complicated area, and it's also a very potentially expensive area. And it looks like if we pass a motion to empower the head of the committee to either support or continue to watch this before April 11th, that's almost an impossible situation. So this is a very complicated issue to form a motion like that so that there's a resolution before April 11th. And it isn't our mission. There are all sorts of business concerns here. This would be a long, protracted review that we would have to undertake with a significant fiscal impact, as well as changing, what we do. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Susan.
Through the chair, I have some comments also. Jim?
Jim.
Yeah, this could be a real slippery slope for the license board. I mean, it almost puts us in a position of enforcement that other agencies should really be taking care of. And I just recommend, not a motion, I just recommend strongly we go with what staff said. Keep an eye on this very closely and monitor it and watch it, because like David said, we're limited in our staffing and organization, And it's not our responsibility to take care of child care. They're just reporting it to us to take other means of enforcement. And I don't think that's our responsibility. So thank you.
Thank you.
Comment real quick, Chair.
Yes.
I agree with Jim there. I mean, this seems to me like it should be maybe a step up for the Department of Consumer Affairs. It makes it sound like contractors are the only deadbeats that don't pay child support. I mean, it should be, if you're licensed by the Department of Consumer Affairs, they need to think about restricting licenses with all of their respective operating units, I would call it. So it seems a little restrictive.
Thank you, Member Guy. Any other comments?
I have a hand raised by Christy at DCA Legal.
Christy, please.
Good afternoon. So I just want to clarify on the current process. The licensee is notified 150 days prior to the suspension that the suspension will occur until they resolve the issue with the child support agency. And in my experience, the child support agencies usually try to engage before they refer to us to avoid this issue because they get sued right along with us if there's an improper suspension. So my experience is that they engage the contractor up front, try to work that through, and then if that fails, then they they provide this list that they match with the department, and it's for all licensees in this department, not just contractors. And they get this notice, and they have 150 days if they're an applicant to get current on their child support, or they get it denied a license. And then the same thing is true for a licensee. 150 days notice, and that would, in either if there is a large corporation, they'd have to disassociate the personnel, or that personnel would have to make the payment within that 150-day period. Otherwise, the entire license is suspended. That's current law. Also, with this bill, we haven't talked about the fact that adding layers of administration will also slow down the recovery process for families that do need the support and are entitled to the support. So there's also that consumer aspect that I don't know if the author understands, that adding accusations, administrative hearing procedures, and regulations to the process will actually slow recovery down for anyone that's entitled to recovery. So just want to put that out there for the board's consideration.
Thank you, Christy. One last go on comments from the board.
We have a hand raised by Fauna.
Fauna, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to address Christy's comment. We actually had a meeting between the Department of Child Support Services, the Department of Consumer Affairs Legislative Office, us, the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Services Family Support Unit, the author's office, and the sponsor, where we made all of those points clear to them. I believe that's why they're considering amendments, or not considering, why they're going to have amendments, is because of we made it clear that this process is automatic. It does not have a fiscal. It exists. It works, and any manual process would just extend the time until the custodial parent receives any payment of their child support order.
Thank you, Fiona. Question one, could you repeat the fiscal liability potentially from CSLB?
Sure. It is, we've estimated a fiscal impact of 1.42 million for the first year and 1.1 million ongoing.
Okay. All right. So with that, currently staff's recommendation in the packet is to do a watch on this item. If there is no motion to take a different position than watch, then we can move on to the next item. If there's someone from the board who would like to present a different motion, please offer that motion at this time. So hearing and seeing no motion, we will then move on to our next item. The next item would be the last bill is SB 630 by Senator Dobbs, which begins on page 167. This bill would require CSLB licensees to provide an email address, if available, at the time of initial licensure and renewal to CSLB. This bill would also require licensees to update their email within 30 days of a change. This bill would protect email address confidentiality by establishing that licensees' email addresses are exempt from disclosure under the California Public Records Act. Additionally, this bill would expand the registrar's authority to revoke a licensee for failure to comply with a disciplinary order that imposes probationary conditions. Kona, would you please speak more on this bill?
Sure. So SB 630 by Senator Dodd was presented to the board as a proposal at its December 8th, 2022 meeting, and it received approval at that time. Based on that approval, Mike Jimnitsky, Chief Deputy Registrar, was kind enough to secure an author for this bill before I arrived. There is no fiscal associated with this bill, and it would greatly improve our ability to communicate with licensees. Additionally, this bill would standardize our processes when discipline is imposed with disciplinary conditions. For example, the registrar has authority to reimpose revocation when restitution is not paid. However, that authority does not exist when the probationary conditions are, for example, to take a class or retake an exam to establish knowledge necessary to conduct business as a contractor. So probationary conditions are imposed in lieu of revocation. So when those conditions aren't met, it makes sense to reimpose revocation. This bill is scheduled to be heard on April 10th, 2023 by the Senate Committee on Business Professions and Economic Development. Again, this is a board-sponsored bill, and staff request support for SB 630. Thank you.
Thank you, Fauna. Any board comments on this item? Hearing and seeing none. So therefore, the staff recommendation is that the board support the CSLB sponsored bill. This would include authority for staff to communicate this position in written letters and public testimony. Are there, again, any board members that have questions or comments on this item? Hearing and seeing none. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Michael Mark, second.
Michael Mark, second. Who was the primary?
Delatorre.
Thank you, Delatorre. Is there board comments on that motion?
Do we need to hear public comment?
We do. Rico, is there public comment?
No public comment.
Thank you. Mariah, please call the roll.
Mary Tykert, approved absence. Rodney Cobos,
Aye.
David De La Torre,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Alan Guy,
Aye.
Jacob Lopez, approved absence. Diana Love,
Aye.
Michael Mark,
Aye.
Stephen Pinelli, approved absence. James Ruane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. This concludes the legislative and regulatory agenda for today's meeting. I now turn it over back to Vice Chair, Ms. Love.
Thank you, Miguel, for your report. And we are coming to the end of our meeting. However, before we do that, I would like to ask for one final public comment not related to items on the agenda, and to also see if Edgar is still with us at this meeting and would like to comment. Rico, are there any comments?
We have a hand raised by James Alvarez. James, you can unmute and speak.
Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to make my concerns about the licensing laws. I made my complaints in a few other meetings that the costs to the new workman's comp, surety bonds, and license fees would do the opposite of the state needs right now, and that's more housing, equitable housing, and more workers in the industry. And compared to many of the other states, our licensing laws come out as the most restrictive, and the FTC has offered plenty of alternatives, 13 from being the most restrictive, and free market, which is standard in Maine. Vermont, Florida has Jim Walter exemptions for small contractors. Louisiana has $50,000 exempt licensure, and they're one of our reciprocity states. And most of the requirements that the board puts have been known to have adverse impacts to competition, to entry, and foster higher costs to consumers. And I would just like to ask the board for looks into alternatives, into different licensing systems, and work with existing states that have made progress in reforms and that operate without state regulation, that have been perfectly fine, have more homeownership rates, lower costs, and less litigation, less people, contractors being sued for unscrupulous work. And I feel Californians deserve the same opportunity, privileges, and immunities that other states have in this industry, and we deserve the same opportunity to build a better California. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Are there any more comments?
There are no comments. We can try to see if Edgar wanted to make comment. We were having some technical issues earlier when he was trying. Edgar, do you want to unmute and see if we can hear you? So it looks like the same issue as earlier. Edgar is unmuted on our side, but we cannot hear you if you are speaking, Edgar.
Do we know if he was ever able to put any comments in the chat?
Yes, there are several comments in the chat from Edgar.
Okay, and we will capture those comments. Thank you.
Yes, they get saved with the recording.
Okay, thank you. We are now at the end of our agenda. This concludes our board meeting for today. Can I please get a motion to adjourn the board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
And who made the motion?
Jim Ruane.
Okay, and the second?
Delatory.
Thank you both. And we do not need a roll call, so that will end our meeting, and our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all and have a good day.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.